Chapter 1. The Dark Rider. The Nevada moon hung low over the horizon, climbing into the empty purple sky of early night. Few stars studding the clear royal tapestry of the darkness. The huge round silvery sphere spread its shimmering moonlight over the rolling countryside, casting long shadows from the butte spires and ponderosa pine. October chill filled the air. A rider emerged from the trees briefly, on the ridge overlooking the valley below. For a moment, the figure was illuminated against the brilliance of the moon. An ominous figure dressed in black, astride an equally black horse. The horse bore no markings, only solid ebony, and the rider was totally enshrouded in darkness, dressed in black from head to toe, with black hat, black riding cape, and a black mask that covered the entire face except for 2 holes for peering eyes. The rider, realizing exposure in the moon glow, pulled the big black horse back into the cover of tree shadows. The black started to stamp and pull at the bit, eager to keep moving, but the masterful touch of the rider drew him quickly under control, and soon he settled to a patient wait, its warm breath steaming in the chill of the night air, as the rider sat quietly watching the valley below. All was quiet and dark in the valley. By day, the site would have been one of furious industry as mine workers worked hard and long in the Glory Hill silver mine. The operations were considerable, and at least 20 workers were on hand toiling and sweating in the tunnels that drilled into the other side of the valley wall. Standing apart from the dig site, casting a large shadow, was a large wooden-framed building. Here, the silver ore was refined, and an adjacent structure provided the stamping for silver bars. The workers had gone home for the night, and all was quiet below. No lights exuded from the refinery or stamp mill. Not a soul seemed to be stirring, but the ominous rider knew the valley was not empty. There would be guards about. Usually 3 men protected the area at all times, but they remained unseen most of the time, appearing briefly during their rounds whenever they emerged from shadow or when the moon was bright enough to reveal them as it was tonight. An hour ticked by. The rider waited, watched. Finally, a guard appeared out of the shadows, striding toward the refinery, his Winchester held high across his chest, alert. The sound of wagon wheels and trappings of harness and the thud of iron-shod horses' hooves broke the stillness of the air. The guard hurried his approach, anticipating the arrival of wagon and team as its shadowy bulk came into view along the trail from the west and pulled up to the front of the refinery. The driver, pulling at the reins and murmuring low commands to the snorting team, drew to a halt. 2 outriders had preceded the wagon, and 2 more from the rear pulled around the outfit and joined the lead men. They greeted the guard with low tones and dismounted. The guard strode to the refinery's entrance that consisted of 2 opposing barn-like doors that opened away from each other to leave a wide opening, big enough to drive a wagon through. A light flared from inside the building, and then the guard reappeared carrying a lantern. The scene was now illuminated enough to reveal the canvas-covered wagon box as the driver urged the team forward past the refinery a bit, then halting the team before pulling back on the reins, forcing the team to back up as he expertly guided the wagon until the rear wheels were just far enough into the refinery to allow room for unloading. With the team outside and the wagon inside, the men could no longer be seen by the dark rider. Eyes peering through the holes of the black mask now focused on another shadowy figure moving stealthily through the shadows toward the refinery. Ramon Chavez crawled into the scrub brush a short distance from the refinery. He was a young man of about 30, and his dark Mexican eyes darted back and forth under the dark sombrero that covered his black wavy hair. He slid his lithe sinewy body into the thicket and lay prone for several minutes, watching and listening to the activity before him. He had spent the last hour evading the guards on duty. He knew their rounds well, for he had been a guard himself for several weeks. But last night he had been fired. Ben Colby, co-manager of the mine, had become enraged the night before when Ramon had investigated activity at the stamping mill, and Colby was there, for whatever reason, Ramon did not know. Colby had called him a stupid Mex and fired him on the spot, warning him not to be seen around there again. He was specifically warned not to appeal to Ed Gordon, the half-owner of the Glory Hill mine. Gordon was a partner with the Nevada Ore Company, an organization that had recently sent Ben Colby to manage and oversee their half-share of the mine. But Ramon did not know who the individuals were who comprised the Nevada Ore Company. Ed Gordon was a fair and honest man. Why he was in league with this outside syndicate, he did not know. He surmised that Gordon had needed financing, and the partnership was a way of getting it. It seemed to Ramon that this financing came with a high price, for Gordon and Colby were always at odds and tempers flew often. Ramon had never liked Colby. Colby was a big hulk of a man, more muscle than fat, and very mean and egotistical. There seemed to be something sinister about him, and Ramon was suspicious of him. These nighttime activities at the mine had been increasing over the past week. Ramon's curiosity was what brought him to the stamp mill the night before. Fortunately for Ramon, Colby thought him to be a dumb Mex. Colby might have killed him on the spot last night if he had known otherwise. Now, as Ramon lay in the bushes watching, he reached to the pistol riding on his hip and pulled it free. He held it at the ready. He had to move closer, for he could not see what was happening inside. He waited a while longer. Only the driver was still in sight on the wagon seat, holding the horses steady. One of the men returned from the building, said something to the driver, and went back inside. With a few cuss words, the driver wrapped the reins about the brake handle and lowered his pot-bellied frame to the ground. He spat tobacco in disgust and lumbered inside. Now was Ramon's chance. He skittered out of the brush, rushed silently to the side of the refinery, and braced his back against the wall, trying to hold his breath and remain silent. From here, he could lean around the corner and peer through the hinge crack between the left-hand door and the wall. If someone came out, he could quickly duck back around the corner. He pushed his sombrero back from his head to fall between his shoulders, suspended by the chin strap. His eyes strained to see into the gloom. He could see men return to and from the wagon, obviously unloading something, but Ramon could not see around the wagon enough to see what it was. He listened intently. Voices were low and he could barely make them out. When room had been made in the wagon bed, two men finally climbed in and started lifting the freight out to the receivers on the floor. Whatever it was heavy, for the two men grunted and their bodies flexed with the weight. The light from the lantern glinted on the cargo as it was handed down. Minted silver bars sparkled in the glow. Why was silver being brought in? It should be being shipped out. Perhaps it was being returned to the mine. Or was it stolen from somebody else? Probably the latter, Ramon thought. All of the mines in the area had been plundered by bandits in the last few weeks. Shipments had been hijacked, and guards and drivers had been killed. The entire mining community had been enraged, but unable to stop the pillaging and unable to determine who was responsible. Ramon had become increasingly suspicious of the night activities at the Glory Hill, and he had become convinced that Ben Colby, whose arrival on the scene coincided with the rash of attacks on the freight wagons, was somehow involved. For several minutes, he watched the men in the wagon bed continue handing the bars out, but with the wagon in the way, Ramon could not see what was going on farther inside the building. Suddenly, a voice boomed from inside, but it was not clear enough for Ramon to make out. But it was definitely a command of some sort, and probably issued from some other person that was not with the men who brought the wagon in. The two men in the wagon bed dropped a silver bar at their feet, thudding against the floorboards of the wagon. They stretched to a full standing position, raising their hands slowly, frightened expressions on their dirty, unshaved faces. What was going on? Ramon needed to see and hear more clearly. He needed to get closer. He swallowed hard as he realized what he must do, and then he moved quickly. Bending low, he scooted around the open door and dove soundlessly under the wagon. He slithered forward on elbows, still holding his pistol at the ready. The commanding voice grew more distinct as he crawled toward the rear wheels of the wagon. He could see into the lantern gloom now. Before him stood 3 men, their backs to the wagon with arms raised. Even from this vantage point, he could recognize the men. One was the wagon driver he had seen earlier. He had seen this man before, but didn't know his name. The other 2 he knew. Rio Pierce, a tall, lanky, swarthy man with grizzled chin whiskers and dark, beady eyes. One eye had a drooping lid and appeared to stare blankly ahead without movement. He wore his pistol belt low, and Ramon had seen him use it before. He had the moves and the bearing of a hired gun, and he was Ben Colby's right hand. He was never far from Colby, and tonight was no exception. Ben Colby himself stood next to him. Colby was saying, "Now, Ed, don't get excited here. Just listen." Across the room, Ed Gordon, half owner of the Glory Hill, could be seen advancing toward them. His craggy, lean face beneath a shock of thinning gray hair was fixed with a menacing grimace. The rear door of the refinery stood scantly open behind him. He had stealthily slipped in and caught Colby and his men red-handed. He jerked the muzzle of his Winchester upward in a short, menacing motion. "I don't have to listen to nothing, Colby. I may be old, but I got eyes. I see what you are doing. That's not Glory Hill silver." "No, it's not, Ed," Colby said with a sigh. "You didn't think this old hole of yours still had anything in, did you?" Gordon ignored the response. "There's silver here all right, but it looks like it wasn't enough for you. I suspected something rotten about you, but I couldn't believe JP would send a crook here to help manage the mine. I don't know how you managed to fool him, but I'm going to find out after I turn you over to the sheriff. I'll bet those raids on the freight wagons will stop with you locked up." "There's a lot of money in this, Ed," Colby said calmly. "String along with me and we'll both be rich." "Huh," Gordon grunted. "I'd rather string along with a rattler." "Suit yourself, Ed." Colby chided and started to lower his arms, a smirk coming to his lips and an amused glint in his eyes. "Rich or dead, what'll it be, Ed?" "Keep those hands up," Gordon ordered, but too late. A crashing blow against the back of his head sent blackness through his brain. His knees buckled and he fell limply to the floor, his rifle skittering away as it slid out of his hands. Ramon jerked his head up, almost hitting the bottom of the wagon bed. He could see the guard, who must have left the building earlier, had returned and slid in behind Ed Gordon. He now stood over the fallen mine owner, his rifle still held by the trigger guard and barrel after clubbing Ed Gordon with the wooden stock. "Good work, Rafe," Colby said, lowering his arms and striding forward to stand over the fallen man's crumpled body. Pierce followed close. The 2 men in the wagon leaped to the floor and followed suit. Rio slid his gun from his holster, stretched his long arm downward, pointing the muzzle close to Gordon's head. The hammer clicked back. Ramon stiffened. He couldn't allow this, but from his position he could not line his sights properly. Then he relaxed a little as he saw Colby grasp Rio's gun arm. "Hold it," Colby ordered. "Not that way. Mr. Gordon's going to have a little accident. Take him to the stamp mill," he chuckled. Rio grinned, and the other men obediently thought it wise to force a little laugh as Rio motioned them to bring the mine owner along as they headed for the rear door. Ramon had to act now, or Ed Gordon would die. He knew now that Colby planned to have him crushed in the stamp mill and pass it off as an accident. Ramon could wait no longer. Odds were against him getting out of this alive, but he had to try. He pushed himself backwards behind the wheel, rolled out from under the wagon, and pushed himself to his feet into a gunman's crouch. "Hold it," he ordered. Colby and his men halted and spun around to face him. "You're not taking him anywhere." Ramon flourished the muzzle, his dark eyes blazing. Rio moved faster than Ramon could react. His pistol came up hip high and barked, flame flashing in the darkened room. Ramon felt the impact as the bullet tore into his chest, just above the heart, and hurled him backward against the wall. The sickening pain followed as he slid to the floor in a still crumpled heap, leaving huge streaks of blood behind and pooling underneath his body. Rio holstered his gun and chuckled. Colby laughed, "Dumb Mex," then added, "What the hell did he come back for?" Then, turning to his men, "Get on with it." They hustled through the door, dragging the unconscious Ed Gordon. Ramon was just beginning to regain his senses as Colby and his men left. He began to stir and move a little. He could hear the stamp mill engine starting and then the methodical thump, thump of the stamping die in its shaft. "Must get up," Ramon commanded himself. "Got to stop them." Ramon reached across the blood-sticky floor and felt the butt of his fallen pistol. His fingers closed tightly around it. He grimaced with pain as it racked his body. Mustering all of his strength, Ramon grasped the side of the wagon and pulled himself to his feet. Nausea waved over him as he stood swaying unsteady. He let it pass, then staggered forward toward the door. Each agonizing step brought him closer to the door. Then he was outside. He leaned back against the wall of the refinery and gulped the fresh air. The coolness of the night seemed to revive him some. He pushed himself away from the wall and continued toward the stamp mill. He was almost through the door. The sound of the stamp machine roared in his ears, but he could still hear the tormented screams of Ed Gordon, who must have regained consciousness long enough to know his fate. Rage and adrenaline flowed through Ramon's veins. He almost forgot his own pain and weakened condition and charged through the opening, firing his pistol randomly straight ahead in rapid succession. Startled, but reacting with cat-like agility, Colby, Rio, and Rafe dove for cover, but the other two henchmen folded and fell to the floor as Ramon's bullets plowed into their midsections. Ramon slid behind an upright pillar and took cover as the remaining three men regained their composure and returned fire. Bullets crashed into the upright, throwing splinters into Ramon's face. He fired back twice, forcing his adversaries to duck low. A glance to his right told him it was already too late for Ed Gordon. He had already been consumed in the thundering shaft of the stamp die. With blind fury, Ramon fired again and again. Then click, empty, must reload. His fingers fumbled at the cartridges as he tried to pull them from the belt loops. One, then two dropped from his hands and rolled across the floor. Rio grinned as he realized the reason for the lull in firing. He raised up and pushed forward, his gun blazing as he came. Ramon pushed back toward the door. Must get away. Bullets sprayed the wall behind him. Rio kept coming, thumbing the hammer of his six-gun back, an evil grin on his swarthy face. Ramon cringed. He knew this was it, with empty pistol. All was futile. Then, as if by magic, a dark shadow swooped through the door, preceded by spitting flame and thunder roar of a six-shooter. The Dark Rider. Rio dropped his pistol and gripped his gun arm with his left hand, blood oozing between his fingers from the bullet-burned welt on his wrist. His grin had turned to a grimace of pain, anger, fear, and stunned disbelief. Another bullet whizzed past him and spatted into the wall next to Colby. Colby once again dived for cover. Rio threw himself sideways, landing on the floor behind a pile of wooden crates. Bullets thudded into them, spewing splinters in all directions. The dark shadow, still firing, reached out a left arm and wrapped it around Ramon, practically engulfing him in the folds of the flowing black cape, and steadied him, while pulling him back through the open doorway into the night and kicking the door shut with a booted foot. Colby, Rio, and Rafe sprang toward the closed door and halted. Rio cautiously opened the door a crack and peered out. He could see the shadowy figures disappear around the back corner of the refinery. He jerked the door wide open, and the three men darted forward in pursuit. Again they halted, and pressed themselves against the wall of the refinery, while Rio once again peered carefully around the corner. Their quarry was now mounted, riding double on a strong black stallion and racing across the moonlit valley. Rio leaped forward and threw shot after them. Colby and Rafe slid to his side, firing just as rapidly. But the great horse was too fast, even with the double weight, and was quickly out of range. Realizing the uselessness of continued fire or even pursuit, the shooters resigned themselves to defeat. "That miserable dark rider has interfered with us too many times," Colby growled, glaring at Rio. "You better find out who that jigger is and kill him. I want you to make sure Chavez is dead too. You should have made sure the first time. I'm sick of your bungling." Anger seething, Rio did not respond as he watched the retreating shadowy figures disappear into the shadows. Icy silence spread over the valley. The huge silvery moon loomed in the chill of a Nevada autumn sky. Chapter 2. The Preacher. The same huge silvery moon loomed in the chill of the Arizona sky, bathing the expansive plain in brilliant moonlight. The chilly night air was silent, but for the splashing sound of wagon wheels churning through a small winding creek just north of the Arizona and the Mexican border. A team of black horses snorted in protest as the driver's whip cracked behind their ears, urging them to strain harder and pull the lumbering vehicle out of the creek bed, bouncing on its springs as it lurched up onto the bank. The team felt the resistance lessen as the wheels rolled free onto soft grassy turf. Large billowing plumes attached to the horses' heads bounced with every move as they lowered their heads and pressed on. Driver, wagon, and team blended into a strange, dark, shadowy shape in the moonlight. The wagon was not an ordinary wagon, but a somber-toned, boxy, window-framed hearse. The driver sat high on the box. His black high-top hat and black frock coat-covered body were framed against the glow of the full moon. The strange shadows rolled on for a minute before the driver pulled the team to a halt to let them blow. He sat casually on the box and examined his surroundings carefully. The moonlight glinted off the rugged, somber face of the driver. His view took in the expanse of flat land to his left, and in front off him dotted with sparse growth of vegetation. To his right stood a high bluff. His keen eyes peered deeply into the darkness, methodically scanning the bluff from one end to the other. It would be a good place for a man to watch any activity below, and in the brilliant moonlight, the preacher and his hearse could easily be seen. The preacher removed his top hat, revealing a neatly trimmed head of black, wavy hair, pulled out a large white handkerchief, and shook it in the breeze before wiping his neck and brow. Stuffing the handkerchief back into his pocket, he glanced back up toward the bluff. Then, placing his tall hat back on his head, took up the reins and clucked to his team. The hearse rolled forward and continued into the night as a man atop a brown horse watched intently from the top of the bluff. The man was young, blonde hair showing beneath his gray Stetson. He had been waiting for the hearse to arrive. The time was getting short now. He had to be alert. His horse nickered as he reined him to the left and prodded his ribs, putting the animal in motion. He held a tight rein, though, as he guided his mount slowly across the butte, riding almost parallel to, but a little behind the hearse, keeping it in sight at all times. He dared not lose sight of the preacher, and he must not move too fast. He must not be seen. Occasionally, the preacher would dart a fleeting glance upward toward the bluff, but did not want to appear obvious. With each glance, he saw nothing. That was good. He shouldn't. The man on the bluff was doing a good job. The hearse lumbered on for a quarter mile. From his vantage point high on the bluff, the young man could see far ahead and to the left of the hearse. The hearse was now in a hollow of the rolling expanse. The young man pulled his horse to a halt, for he could see two riders approaching the team from the other side of the ridge from where the hearse was. Off to the young man's right on the other side of the bluff, he gazed off into the dark valley below. Nothing seemed to move down there, and the brilliant light of the moon only cast deep, dark shadows of the butte into the valley. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat as he gulped with resignation. He hoped the men were in that valley where they should be. He urged his horse forward, watching the hearse climb to the top of the ridge and pull to a halt as the riders rode up to meet him. The preacher pulled his team to a halt as the two men approached and halted beside him. In the moonlight, the preacher could easily make out the features of the riders. One was a heavy man of about 30, dressed slovenly and several days' growth of black beard on his puffy jaws. The other was younger, just as unkempt, with a shock of long, greasy red hair hanging below his stoved-in hat and lying in stringy strands on his narrow shoulders. "Purdy and Stoner?" the preacher asked curtly. "That's right," the stocky one answered. "I'm Purdy. This is Stoner." He thumbed at his companion. "Anyone on your trail?" "No," the preacher answered flatly. "I've done this enough times that nobody notices an undertaker on his duty," he chuckled. "Just show me the way. Let's get this over with." "Okay," Purdy said, reeling his mount and riding forward. Stoner followed suit. The undertaker clucked to his team and slapped the reins across their backs. The team started forward, straining in their harness to overcome the inertia of the parked hearse with its heavy load. As the wheels began to turn, the burden seemed to lessen, and they lumbered on into the night following the guides. Purdy and Stoner led the undertaker on a winding trek through a grove of pinyon trees, over a grassy knoll into a narrow valley. They rode on for about 10 minutes before the valley opened wide and poured out into a large expanse of flat grassland. Directly ahead were the shapes of several buildings. As they rolled closer, the undertaker could make out the features of a large 2-story ranch house, brightly lighted on the first floor. About 50 yards to the left of the house were two low, unpretentious structures. One appeared to be a 1-story bunkhouse, and the other halfway between it and the house was probably a cookhouse. Another 50 yards to the right was a large barn with an attached corral behind it. Several head of horses milled about chewing on hay from the mangers. A wagon and a harnessed 4 stood at the ready outside the corral. Two large barn doors, swinging away from each other, left a wide, gaping maw into the barn. Lanterns had been placed at intervals along the driveway toward the barn, and the inside of the barn was lit as well, revealing several men busy in a hub of activity. The two guides led the undertaker along the path and separated, pulling their mounts to the side as they neared the open doors, and motioned the hearse driver to drive straight into the barn. "Whoa, whoa," the preacher commanded, leaning back, pulling the reins tight. The horses nickered in protest as they felt their heads restrained, being pulled back and high. They stamped to a halt and blew as they felt the reins relax. Several men were gathering around, crowding the wagon and team. All were in range clothing and heavily armed. A stocky man with huge shoulders and a neatly trimmed black mustache punctuating his round, florid face, stepped forward, obviously in charge. "Mr. Smith, I presume?" the man cajoled. "I'm Ace Murdoch. I assume you've got the goods." "That's right, I have, sir. Smuggling across the border is easy for a man of the cloth," the preacher/undertaker half grinned with self-satisfaction. "I always deliver," then added coolly, "and I always get paid." "Oh, you'll get paid all right, Mr. Smith. Now how about getting down from there and let's have a look at the goods?" Murdoch responded nonchalantly and stepped back a little, making room for the man in the long black coat and hat to step down, stride to the rear of the hearse, and open the rear doors. Murdoch peered inside. There were 3 coffins cramped close to each other as there was no room for anything else. Murdoch nodded approval, stepped back, and motioned to the men around him. "Get them out of there so we can take a look." Then to the man in black, "Right this way, Mr. Smith. We'll get you your money." He led him to the side out of the way of the unloading and to a tool bench cluttered with nails and leather. A black leather satchel sat in the middle of the bench. The preacher reached quickly for the bag, but Murdoch grabbed the bag first and held it tight to his thick midsection. "Not yet, my friend. After we open the coffins." The tall man in black eyed him with offense, then glanced back to the men opening the coffins. They had the lids off now, and they stood in silent admiration of the gleaming silver bars packed neatly inside. "Satisfied?" the preacher asked snidely. "Not yet," Murdoch answered, "but I will be." His Colt snaked out of the holster at his wide hip, and the barrel pressed hard into the undertaker's stomach muscles. The hammer clicked back. A smile of triumph spread across Murdoch's thick lips. "Now get your hands up and keep them up," he demanded, reaching under Mr. Smith's coat and feeling for the pistol he knew was riding in an underarm holster rig. "What is this?" the preacher protested. "This some kind of double cross to get out of pain?" Murdoch smiled as he retrieved the pistol and stuffed it into his belt. "Yes, it's a double cross, all right, but I believe you're the double crosser, Mr. G-Man." Jack Clayton knew there was no need to protest or pretend. His cover had been blown. He said nothing, just waited to find out what had gone wrong. His cool blue eyes stared levelly into Murdoch's porky face. "I must thank you for the silver, though," Murdoch chided. "We have plans for it." "Unfortunately," Clayton smiled, "you won't get far with it. You didn't think I'd come here alone. There's marshals all around this place. You might as well give it up right now." "I'm sure you believe that's true, but unfortunately for you, you are sadly mistaken." Murdoch giggled confidently, the flab around his thick neck shaking like a bowl of jelly. No comment from Jack. He waited for the rest of it. Murdoch was savoring the taunt. "Spence," Murdoch called, pointing his chin toward the rear of the barn. From out of the shadows, a lean, scruffy henchman appeared, dragging a form behind him. As he stepped into the light so Jack could get a good look, he violently shoved the dead body of a young, fair-haired man at Clayton's feet. Jack's eyes darkened with anger and hatred. The young man was green to the business of law and had hardly had time to live. Now he was cut down for doing his job. He had been watching from the butte to see where Clayton was being led. Once he knew the destination, he was to have notified the marshals and their men at the foot of the butte and brought them here to apprehend the receivers of smuggled silver. "You see, Mr. Clayton, you never got a chance to bring your men. Too bad for you." "You still won't get away with it," Clayton bluffed. "When they don't get the word, they'll come looking anyways." "Jack! Jack! Jack!" A smooth voice chided from behind him. Clayton turned slightly to the side, still eyeing Murdoch. He saw the man out of the corner of his eye, not really seeing him until he stepped around to face him. He knew who he was even before the man stepped into clear vision. You never give up trying. When will you ever learn? That man was a tall, good-looking man, about Jack's age and build. He wore a black broadcloth suit and a black flat-crowned hat with a band of shiny conchos that matched the shiny conchos adorning his fancy hand-tooled black Buscadero gun belt, sporting 2 holsters with matched pearl-handled 6-guns riding low on his hips and protruding beneath his suit coat. "I was wondering when you were going to tip your hand, Tom," Clayton said flatly without surprise. "Like you had a clue. Come off it, Jack. I had you all fooled, and I'll keep on fooling them all." Jack shrugged. "I already told the men to wait in the woods in Grass Valley. We won't take the silver anywhere near there," Tom said triumphantly. Jack still tried to bluff, trying to exude some confidence. "They'll wait only so long. When nothing happens, they're going to come looking." "Still trying, aren't you, Jack?" Tom came back. "Sorry, it won't work. Something is going to happen. We're going to give them something to chase while the silver goes elsewhere." Again, Jack waited. Tom was keeping the best part for last. He couldn't wait to continue his boast. I suppose you don't want to know what they are going to chase. I'm sure you're going to tell me anyways, Jack said with resignation. Tom turned to look to the rear of the hearse. The coffins had been emptied of the silver bars. The lids lay strewn on the straw-covered floor of the barn. Nice coffins, Tom said. I'll bet you'll find one nice and comfortable. Again, Jack shrugged. How about you go over there and pick one out? He drew his right-hand pistol and eared back the hammer. And get in it, he ordered with a snarl through his even white teeth. Jack eyed him squarely and turned toward the coffins. I guess it's past my bedtime anyways, Jack said, as he shuffled forward and halted at the first coffin. Let me guess, said Jack. You're going to ship me to the marshals. Very good, Jack, Tom chided. They'll think the silver is still in the hearse. We'll send along 2 guards on horses and a driver sitting right up front with the preacher man himself. Jack tipped his head quizzically. Tom continued, They will think I'm you on the box. And you'll all be captured, Clayton said. Now don't you worry about that, Jack. We've got that all worked out too. He jerked the muzzle of his pistol toward the coffin. No more talk now, he said menacingly. Get in that box, now. Jack stepped in. Wait a minute, Tom ordered. Murdoch, get that hat and coat off him. One more thing, Jack, Tom said after Murdoch had done his bidding. We thought you might like some company, so we are going to use a second coffin. That one will be filled with dynamite and gunpowder. Your marshals are going to get a big bang out of you. A little late for the 4th of July, Tom. Jack sat in the box and stretched out. But just in time for Halloween, Jack. Trick or treat. Murdoch placed the lid on the coffin, leaving Jack in total blackness. Jack breathed deeply. The past few minutes of trying to keep his composure had been a strain. Now he could let panic pour over him. What to do now? Was this finally the end for him? His thoughts were drowned out by the hammering of nails into the coffin lid. The hammering echoed in his ears, and the box vibrated on all sides and beneath him. His heart started to pound, and his breathing increased rapidly. Then, willing himself to relax, he told himself he must get his fear under control. He must slow his breathing, had to conserve air, make what little he had last. Once the hammering stopped, he could concentrate on the task at hand. He breathed deeply and let it out slowly, gradually slowing the rising and falling of his chest, and had just gotten it under control when he felt the coffin being lifted. He felt the thud of the coffin against the hearse floor. He vaguely could hear the loading of the other coffin and the closing of the hearse doors. Then he felt the hearse move beneath him as the horses backed it out of the barn and far enough down the driveway to turn around and head off, pulling their load into the coolness of the night air. Chapter 3. Death of Jack Clayton. Clayton could feel every bump as the coffin jostled with the spring of the hearse and the scrape of the wheels over rocks and chuck holes. He had to act fast. He had to get out before he either ran out of air or the wagon encountered the marshals. His gun had been taken from him, but they had not examined his boot where he kept a well-concealed stiletto knife. He had to reach it and get it out. With the knife, he could try to pry open the lid. But first, he had to get the knife. His body was crunched into the coffin, his arms stretched down his legs, but he couldn't rise enough to bend his body and reach his boot. Stretching and straining, he was finally able to bend his knees a little, bringing his boot top a little closer, but not enough. His fingers stretched until they hurt. His thighs ached until a Charlie horse set in, the pain forcing him to relax a moment. The wagon lumbered on. Again and again he tried to reach his boot. Again and again he failed. Heat was building up in the close confines of the coffin. Sweat poured down his brow and dripped into his eyes. They burned. Then, finally, His fingertips touched the top of his boot. Almost, almost. The hearse lurched, and he lost his position once more. Try again, again, again. He had it, the thumb and forefinger over the top of the knife handle. Slowly it slid free, more fingers sliding onto it. Then they curled into a grip, and the knife slipped out of the boot. Holding back his excitement, he raised the knife over his body and felt for the edges of the coffin and lid. He felt the corner and plunged the blade into the joint. The point of the blade merely stuck in the wood. Jack pulled it back out and plunged the blade in again and again. Making little progress, for the close confines did not afford leverage room for strong stabs. His body rocked from side to side as the wagon trudged onward over some very rough terrain, but still he diligently continued his attack of the coffin lid. From his vantage point in the shadows among the trees, Marshal Lon Kramer sat patiently in his saddle and peered out into Grass Valley. His gray mare stamped nervously beneath him, and his posse of 2 deputy marshals and 3 volunteers huddled close behind him. The night chill was increasing, and hot breath from horses and riders clouded in a mist about them. For an hour they had sat here, watching, waiting. The bright moonlight lit the valley before them with a brilliant sheen. They would be able to see their quarry plainly when they entered the valley. Another quarter hour passed. Then the stillness of the night was broken as the sound of approaching horses and the sound of churning wagon wheels. Kramer jerked his body erect and sat tall in his saddle. "Get ready, men," he ordered in a loud, raspy whisper. "Here they come. Wait until I give the word, then follow me. Remember, be careful with your shooting. We don't want to risk hitting Jack. But if you see he's clear, let those jiggers have all the lead you can give them." He pulled his pistol from his holster, as did the others. In a moment, the hearse and team came into view, entering the valley. "Hold it, hold it," the marshal said slowly and low. "Let them get right in front of us." The hearse moved steadily closer. The marshal and his men could now see the hearse plainly. There were 2 outriders, one on each side of the hearse as escort. There was a driver on the box, and next to him was a shadowed man in long black coat and high top hat. His hands appeared tied in front of him over his knees. It looked like Jack was now under suspicion and had been bound. But, even in the light of the brilliant moon, the lawmen could not see that it was not Jack on the seat with the driver. They also could not see that in the bound hands was a length of fuse wire that led back inside the hearse to the coffin of explosives. In the fake Jack's teeth, a lit cigar glowed dimly in the dark. Inside Jack's coffin, he furiously plunged the knife into the seam below the lid again and again. Shards of wood and cloth showered him and clung to his sweaty body. His breathing extremely labored with the vanishing air supply. Time was running out. Had to get out. The lawmen were almost ready to ride out now, but the advantage of surprise was suddenly lost as the 2 outriders pulled together and turned toward the woods, their pistols out, spewing flame and belching thunder as they rode forward toward the grove of trees. Lead pellets crashed through the branches, but nowhere close to the posse. Kramer, taken by surprise, took no time to analyze the effect of the shooting. His patience had worn thin, and this sudden burst of attack prompted him into immediate action. His mount bolted out of the cover of the trees, the posse close behind him. Kramer returned fire as he rode forward, and his followers followed suit. The attacking outlaws whirled their mounts around and headed back toward the hearse and out of range of the lawmen's fire. The hearse driver whipped up the team into a run, and the entire party raced across the valley. The chase was on, pistol and rifle fire filling the night air. Inside the coffin, Jack felt the sudden lurch of the hearse and the speeding run of the team. He was slammed back and forth against the sides of the box and interfering with his work on the lid. He could hear the muted top of gunfire. His heart began to race faster, and perspiration beaded more profusely as he furiously fought to continue chopping into the coffin. Time had all but run out. Had to get out, soon. The outlaws and hearse followed the trail out of the valley, lawmen in hot pursuit. Guns blazing. The valley emptied into a flat plain that extended 100 yards to the left and ending abruptly at a precipice overlooking the Smoke River 150 feet below. To the right, bordering the trail, a mountain blocked passage to the west. The trail curved and wound around the mountain. Hearse and outlaws plunged out of the valley, keeping on the trail close to the mountain. It would be a matter of seconds before the posse would come into view again, pouring out of the valley. One of the outlaw riders rode up close to the hearse, parallel to the driver's box. The driver nodded it was time. His companion on the seat touched the lighted end of the cigar to the fuse in his hands. It sputtered into flame and sizzled as it started its trek along the wire toward the explosives. Then he pitched sideways from the seat to land on the hard, packed trail and roll away from the vehicle. At the same time, the driver yanked a strip of rawhide that was tied to the kingpin holding the wagon tongue. The hearse's team of horses came free and galloped off down the trail. The hearse slewed toward the left across the grassy plain as the driver reached out toward the outrider and was pulled aboard his racing steed. The posse roared out of the valley in time to see the outlaws and horses racing on down the trail, the hearse rolling at increasing speed across the flat toward the precipice. Then the man in the top hat and coat rose from the ground to stand in their path. The lawmen pulled up, horses' feet sliding in the gravel of the trail. "Jack!" Kramer shouted. Then, as the moonlight reflected off the man's face, he realized that it was not Jack. "Tom!" he exclaimed with surprise. "Never mind me," Tom shouted, holding his bound wrists high for all to see. "Stop that hearse. Jack's still inside." Kramer started to wheel his horse, but pulled up short. He swallowed hard, knowing it was too late. With the speed behind the hearse as it approached the precipice, the wagon seemed to grow wings as it pitched high into the purple sky as it left the precipice. Almost as if in slow motion, the hearse seemed to hang suspended in mid-air, silhouetted against the huge looming full moon, and then, with the roar of thunder and flash of brilliant light, it exploded. Again and again, with successive smaller streaks of lightning and thunder. Then, as the echoes died away, the remnants and debris rained slowly into the river below. Chapter 4. The New G-Man. "I just can't believe he's gone," said Senator Joshua P. Ballard, sitting in his usual chair in front of John Randolph's ornate mahogany table he used for a desk. He seemed so indestructible. He shook his large head despondently. The gray of his thinning hair and neatly trimmed mustache seemed grayer today with the somber hue of his hazel gray eyes. "I find it difficult to believe myself," John Randolph responded, deep sadness in his deep baritone voice, which added to the distinguished looks of the tall man who was now approaching middle age with slightly graying temples and thin brown hair. Randolph sat behind his table, with his back to the floor to ceiling glass doors that led out onto the patio of his French-styled stately mansion that was the hub of his vast sprawling estate called Randolph Farms, just north of and out of the city limits of St. Joseph, Missouri. To the outside world, Randolph Farms bred and raised the finest racing horses in the state. But it was not just a farm. It was in fact the secret headquarters for the Western Region's Justice Department operations, and John Randolph, horse breeder, was in fact deputy director, and Jack Clayton had been his ace operative. "Sally and I owed our lives to Jack," the senator from Missouri mumbled reminiscently. "If it weren't for Jack, Sally and I would not be here today." Many months ago, the senator had traveled west to find his daughter that he had not seen since she was a baby. He had finally found her, but en route home, They were kidnapped. Jack had rescued them. Sally became John Randolph's secretary assistant and lived in the senator's St. Joseph mansion while the elder spent his time in Washington. Consequently, when Senator Ballard was in town, he would frequently visit John Randolph. They had a lot in common, since both were government officials, and their friendship had been growing while many of the senator's old friends had shied away from him, saying he was not the same as he used to be before the kidnapping affair. The senator admitted that since the abduction ordeal, he had never fully recovered to be the man he used to be. "We all owe Jack a great deal," Randolph said. "Such a shame," Senator Ballard said. "Did he have any family? I don't believe anyone ever mentioned much about his personal life." "No, Jack was a very private man," Randolph said. "Even when it came to business, I'm sure he kept secrets from me." Then he added, "He does have a sister-in-law in Cleveland. Jack never talked about his family, but I heard that after the war between the states, he headed west with his brother. His brother planned on ranching, but Jack had a law degree and planned on practicing law. He had a wife and a 2-year-old son. His brother had a wife and a 3-year-old daughter. The wagon train they were traveling with was ambushed by white renegades. There were few survivors. Of Jack's family, only his sister-in-law survived, and Jack was seriously wounded. Jack's brother, wife, and son were killed. His brother's little girl disappeared. No one knows whether she lived or died." "How terrible for the poor man," Ballard commiserated. "Yes," Randolph agreed. "Jack vowed vengeance on those marauders, and with the help of the army, he finally brought them to justice. After that, Jack stayed on to work for the government. Eventually, he came to work for me and devoted his life to trying to right wrongs and put evil persons where they belong." "Quite a man," Ballard sighed regretfully. "Yes," agreed Randolph. "He'll be hard to replace. Maybe impossible. But I understand his replacement is due in this morning, and I did want you to meet him." Of course," the senator agreed. "He's been working with Jack on the silver smuggling. He's the one most familiar with the case, and he's the logical choice to follow this silver trail into the trouble in Nevada." A knock came to the solid mahogany door, and without waiting for an answer, Sally Ballard popped her blonde head of curly hair through the opening and wriggled her pert little nose above a coquettish smile. "Mr. Reagan is here to see you, sir," she announced most professionally. "Good, good," Randolph said with enthusiasm as he stood up from his comfortable black leather chair. Sally pushed the door wide open and stepped back. "Go right in, Mr. Reagan. Mr. Randolph will see you now." "Thank you, miss." The tall, good-looking man in a black broadcloth suit, white shirt, vest, and black string tie said as he strode confidently into the big room. Randolph rushed around the corner of his table to greet him, arm extended to shake his hand. Reagan switched his black flat-crowned hat to his left hand while he reached to grasp Randolph's hand. Senator Ballard half-turned in his seat watching the young man. Amazing, he thought, how similar to Jack Clayton he looked and dressed. Even to the blue eyes and dark hair, although it was straight and not wavy as Jack's had been. The ornate silver Concorde hatband matched the Concorde black Buscadero gun belt, sporting 2 pearl-handled 6-guns that rode in hand-tooled black holsters low on both thighs. "I'm Tom Reagan," he announced. "I'm John Randolph." "Glad to meet you, Mr. Reagan," the deputy director said, pumping his arm. "Please sit down." He motioned toward the empty chair to the right of the senator as he moved back around to his own chair, and then, just before being seated, he added, "This is Senator Joshua P. Ballard of Missouri. What we talk about here, he will keep confidential." The senator half raised his bulk out of the chair, shook hands, and sank back into the comfort of the chair. Reagan took his seat and settled himself. "You were there when Jack was killed?" Randolph said, not really a question and not really a statement either. "Yes," said Reagan. "Even though I saw it, it's hard to believe. He was a good friend," he said resolutely, as if he really meant it. "We worked well together." That's why we want you to continue this silver case. I'd be glad to. Maybe in some way I can make it up to Jack. I feel that I let him down." "Nonsense," Randolph exclaimed. "Jack knew the risks, as I'm sure you do too, but I'm sure Jack would be pleased if you can finish what he started." "I hope so, sir." Randolph smiled. "Sure, now let's get down to cases." He glanced from Reagan to Ballard. "Senator, I know you are aware that there is pressure to remonetize silver as backing for our currency. As you recall, silver was the standard several years ago, but it was demonetized and replaced entirely by gold as the only legal standard. Silver reduced tremendously in value, and holders of silver were enraged to see their holdings dwindle to almost no value." Ballard nodded affirmation of Randolph's dissertation. Reagan listened intently, his penetrating blue eyes focused on Randolph. "Now it looks like silver will once again be used as a standard, although only partially. The net result is that if the bill to remonetize silver is passed, silver is once again becoming valuable and demand is increasing. Silver is being smuggled into this country, as you know, Tom. What you saw in Arizona is just part of this pipeline to bring in silver from all over the world and increase American supply as fast as possible." Reagan nodded. "Silver mines in the West are back in production. Miners are reopening old mines and producing new silver," Randolph continued. "But these mines have come under attack from bandits and marauders. We suspect that they are part of a large organization trying to amass all the produced silver supply, as well as smuggling more in from abroad." His gaze drifted to Senator Ballard. The senator shifted his weight in the chair. Randolph picked up a letter from his desk as if to read it. "I have here, gentlemen, a letter from a Colonel Theodore Montrose. Although he was an adversary in the late war between the states, he is now a foremost American. He is president of the Miners Association in Spring City, Nevada, and he has asked for government intervention into the rampant attacks on the silver mines and their shipments to the Carson City Mint." "Are you sure this is a government issue right now, John? It's not like the smuggling. That is clearly government business," Ballard asked. "After all, the bill has not yet been passed. It may not be. With the election right around the corner, it may depend on who the next president is. If it's Hayes, I know he's against the bill." "Well, the way I see it," Randolph answered, "American citizens are being pillaged, and they have asked for help from the government. I agree with my superiors that we should give them the aid they are asking for." Ballard nodded, hesitantly in agreement. "I want you, Tom," Randolph directed to Reagan, "to go to Spring City, contact Colonel Montrose, and do what you can to find out who is behind the trouble there and stop it. I suspect you'll find that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a well-organized plot, and the trail will probably lead you to men in high positions. I want those men exposed, no matter how much power they may possess." "I understand, sir," Reagan nodded. "I'll get right on it." The senator was silent and thoughtful, eyeing the young man intently. "Jack's horse Regret has been shipped back here and is in our stables. If you can make friends with him, I'm sure Jack wouldn't mind if you took him." "Thank you, sir," Tom responded with a wry half-grin. "But I have met that big black stallion before, and I'm sure if I attempted to ride him, I would regret it for sure." Randolph and the senator chuckled at that. "Besides, I have a big chestnut stallion, myself, that is highly spirited. I won him in a poker game from a man who named him Red Devil. He'll stack up to Regret or any other horse you have here." "Good, then that is all," Randolph responded, then stood and handed a train ticket across the table to Reagan. "You can take the train from Kansas City directly into Spring City. It leaves at noon." Reagan retrieved the ticket and placed it in his left inside coat pocket and stood up. He extended his hand to Randolph, then to Ballard, who refrained from rising his large bulk from the chair. Their eyes met briefly. "I'll do my best," Reagan said, glancing back toward Randolph, and started to turn for the door. "And Tom," Randolph added. Reagan stopped short, his hand still on the knob of the open door. Don't trust anyone. That's good advice, Tom Reagan agreed with a broad smile, glancing from Randolph to Ballard and back to Randolph. Mighty good advice indeed. The door closed behind him. Chapter 5. G-Man's Ghost. The train whistle blared shrilly. Tom Reagan had finally got settled in his seat after loading his big red stallion in the livestock boarding car and finding an empty seat in the passenger car. He was tired and sat back, settling down for the long trip to Nevada. He tipped his fancy black Stetson low over his eyes and stretched out his long legs. Might as well get in a nap if the darn whistle didn't keep him awake. The engine started to chug, and giant train began to inch forward. The whistle blew again. The door to the passenger car opened. The clank of the engine roared in. The whistle blared again. A striking young lady stumbled through, the floor of the moving car lurching beneath her. She placed her hand on the top of her sliding bonnet and clutched her carpet traveling bag firmly with her other hand against her body as she leaned back against the car door and pushed it closed behind her. She looked a bit frazzled and harried, as if she had just barely made it to the train in time. The train wheels seemed to grasp the rails, take hold, and start moving the big iron horse forward at an increasing rate of speed, although still fairly slow. The young lady, dressed in a blue gingham traveling dress and matching bonnet, had blonde curly hair, light complexion, and rosy cheeks with long curved lashes above her clear blue eyes. She staggered drunkenly, although perfectly sober, along the aisle, bracing herself between the upright backs of the seats, looking for a place to sit. She spotted an empty aisle seat next to the well-dressed gentleman, with the hat pulled low over his face. She traversed forward, and upon stopping unsteadily on her feet, holding the seat back for support, she said, "Excuse me, sir, is this seat taken?" Reagan pursed his lips in annoyance and pushed his hat up. Immediately, the annoyance left him, and he brightened, delighted with such good fortune. The lady was stunning. He pulled his long legs back, sat up quickly, and doffed his Stetson, holding it in gentlemanly fashion across his chest. "No, ma'am," he said with relish. "My pleasure. Here, let me help you with your bag." He reached for it. "No, thank you," she said crisply, with an air of independence, and slung the bag into the overhead compartment. "Would you like the window seat, ma'am?" He started, but she curtly interrupted his gallantry. "No, the aisle is just fine." She took the seat promptly, almost falling into it as the train lurched again. The whistle blew, and the engine whined as it started to pick up speed. Her bulky skirt billowed against Tom Reagan's thigh, and she adjusted it promptly. "I hope I'm not crowding you, sir," she apologized. "Oh no, not at all," he protested. "Let me assure you I am very pleased you could join me. I had been expecting a dull, lonely trip." "Well, don't get excited, Buster." The polite sir had turned to annoyed Buster. Her blue eyes flashed with anger. "If you think I'm a pickup, you are most wrong." Whoa there, miss. I'm sorry if I came across that way. I merely meant that the company would be appreciated. I assure you, I am making no advances to you. After all, I have a wife and 7 children." He lied with a grin on his face. 7? My God, she gasped. "Oh, but 2 sets of twins. I didn't mean to." She started to apologize. "There, you see," he said. "We both didn't mean anything. Let's start again. I'm Tom Reagan on my way to Nevada on business." "I'm a cattle buyer." He offered his hand. The lady smiled sheepishly and took it. "I'm Francie Jones," she said, not offering any more about herself or her destination. "My mother always warned me about talking to strangers, so you see, it was nothing personal." Reagan told himself that he saw the light of interest in the young lady's eyes. He didn't think she really believed him about the wife and kids. This could be a mighty interesting trip if she was going as far as he was. He wondered about her destination, but didn't ask. He was sure she would tell him sooner or later. He was sure he could break down her defenses. After all, he gloated to himself, he was a master at it. The miles trudged on, and the conversation became less stilted, eventually becoming more relaxed, more instantaneous. They chatted and laughed comfortably, the time ticking away, the miles falling behind them. And when he finally slid in the question of her destination, she blurted, absent of all privacy protection, "I'm going to Alkali Springs to visit my sister and her husband. They have a horse ranch." Reagan didn't let her finish. "Alkali Springs?" he exclaimed. "We just passed it." "What?" She practically jumped from her seat. Her voice was loud enough to draw attention from the other passengers. "Didn't you hear the conductor call for Alkali Springs?" "No, but we didn't stop anywhere." "I would have known," she protested. "No one was getting off. The train didn't stop. If I had known, I would have pointed it out to you. I feel it is my fault," Reagan said. "I must have distracted you and you didn't hear the call." "No, that can't be," she screamed, throwing herself out of the seat trying to stand erect. But the lurching of the train beneath her feet forced her body against the seat upright as she reached for her bag on the upper shelf and dragged it violently out of its repository. With a sudden yelp of surprise, she fell into Reagan's lap and arms. He laughed at the spectacle and the contact. He threw his arms around her, carpet bag and all. She struggled to free herself, shouting her protest at the restraint. Reagan only laughed louder and squeezed her tighter. "That does it, Buster," she screamed. It was back to Buster again. She brought the traveling bag up in a single swoop and plastered it against Tom Reagan's face. He released his grip with sudden surprise, and his hands went to his head, dizziness and clouds of darkness swirling around in his stunned brain. She pushed herself off him, sliding back into the aisle, her soft hands seeming to drift along his coat lapel. By the time Reagan recovered from the attack, he could see her rushing toward the car door, pulling it open, letting in a blast of air and noise, and then disappearing as the door swung shut. Reagan rubbed his aching jaw. Then he realized that he thought he had felt or noticed something wrong. His hand darted his inside coat pocket. His eyes darkened with anger and chagrin as he realized his wallet was gone. Why, that little faker, he thought. Just a cheap little pickpocket. And he had fallen for it. He dove forward out of his seat and pushed his way to the car door and rushed out, crossed over the coupling platform, and opened the door of the second adjoining passenger car. Just as he pushed the door open, he saw the fleeing girl exiting out the door at the other end of this car. He trudged on, hoping to close the distance between them. On through the exit he followed, again across a coupling platform, and through the door of the next car. It was dark inside this car, save for what little light flashed, though cracks in the walls and around the sliding side door. In the dim light, he could make out the shapes of boxes, baggage, and freight. He stood silent for a few moments, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. He listened, heard a sound, then glimpsed a movement as a shadow ducked behind a pile of wooden boxes. Reagan half smiled to himself with satisfaction and edged slowly toward the hiding place. "Miss Jones," he chided triumphantly, "I know you're there." "And now you know I'm here," a deep, manly voice said from behind him, and he felt the hard steel of a gun muzzle pressing deep into his spine. He let out a sudden gasp of pain and surprise. His body tensed and froze, except for the automatic and slow rising of his hands acknowledging his capture. "Keep your hands up and don't move," the voice commanded. Francie stepped out from behind her cover, reached for a lantern hanging from an upright and lit it. The glow illuminated the car, casting ominous shadows. "So this was all a setup," Reagan sneered. "And I fell for it." "Hook, line, and sinker," Francie smiled, lifting a .38 caliber pistol in her right hand and pointing it directly into Tom's face. "So tell me, Jack, Just how did you manage to get out of that coffin and hearse? Reagan said nonchalantly, as if he were confident that he could still be in control of the situation. Maybe I didn't, Tom, Jack Clayton said, pressing the pistol barrel harder into Reagan's back, forcing him to jump. Maybe I'm a ghost here to haunt you. Reagan felt Clayton's left hand encircle his waist, fingers fumbling for Tom's gun belt buckle. Now don't get excited, Tom, Jack said as he loosened the buckle. You're not my type. The gun belt and matching 6 guns fell heavily to the floor. I'll be needing those fancy guns of yours. Then he plucked the fancy Stetson from Reagan's head. And this too. The train whistle blew. The train seemed to be slowing down, and the car floor slanted upward as the train chugged up an inclined grade. Looks like we are right on time, Francie, Jack said. Get the door while I keep this guy under control. She moved quickly to the sliding door, unlatched it, and slid it open. Wind and sunlight burst into the open car with a blinding force. Francie stepped back from the door out of the blast and grabbed an upright for stability. Jack held Reagan tighter and once again prodded him with the gun barrel, letting him know that with the suddenness of environment change that this was not an opportunity to try and escape. Jack held him a few moments, getting his bearings in the wind which was dying down as the train slowed in its upward climb. Okay, Clayton said. Move to the doorway. Be careful, you don't want to fall out before I'm ready to toss you out. He pushed Reagan forward, their legs and feet moving in tandem and unison. You can't do that, Reagan protested, his fear getting the best of him and his fake show of confidence gone. Jack forced him to the edge of the opening. The ground was whizzing by, almost a blur. I'll be killed, Reagan screamed. Then, I guess that will just about make my day. Jack shoved him out, pushing hard enough that he would roll away from the chugging train. Farther up along the track, Clayton could see 3 riders waiting. As the bundle fell from the train and rolled in the dust, they spurred their horses forward to pick him up like a sack of mail. As a prisoner of Rutherford B. Hayes' agents, he would be kept out of the way. Jack and Francie laughed. Chapter 6. Shootout in Spring City. It was mid-morning the next day when the train made its stop at Spring City. Jack Clayton, wearing his usual black broadcloth suit, and Tom Reagan's fancy black hat and gun belt, stepped off the train, turning to take Francie's arm and gallantly help her down the steps, although she didn't need help. Nonetheless, as a couple to the outside world, they were a perfect picture of a gentleman and lady. Jack, with Tom Reagan's hat and guns, would now be Tom Reagan. Francie worked for Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes was currently running for president in hopes of being in a position to right many of the wrongs and atrocities that had occurred during President Grant's scandal-ridden 8 years in office. Jack had worked for Hayes a few months earlier. Rutherford B. Hayes, Rudy as Jack called him, had served with Jack in the Ohio militia during the war between the states. Jack had saved Rudy's life, and they had become friends. It was a daring a conspiracy that sent Jack to the Black Hills and had reunited them. Jack had unofficially continued to work for Hayes, unbeknownst to John Randolph. Something sinister was happening within the Justice Department, and Jack no longer knew who he could trust. Although he trusted Randolph implicitly, he chose to leave him out of the loop as to his involvement with the presidential candidate. Clayton was already working on the silver smuggling case when Rudy contacted him about the silver problem that was shaping up with the remonetization bill. With a common goal, Hayes had assigned Francie Jones, one of his best operatives, to work with Jack on this case. Jack and Francie had worked well before in the Black Hills. Now, Jack as Tom Reagan and Francie Jones descended from the train, the livestock car was being unloaded and a handler was leading a tall red stallion, already saddled and bridled, down the loading ramp. Jack hooked his carpet traveling bag over the saddle horn, took up the reins in his left hand, and picked up Francie's bag with his right. The two of them strode off away from the train toward the main streets of town. The striking couple and magnificent stallion did not go unnoticed. A pair of piercing gray eyes focused on them and followed their movements away from the depot. From under the awning shade of the ticket booth, a wizened elderly man watched intently. He was slim in stature, and his jeans, shirt, and vest hung loose. His pistol belt seemed to be slipping off his thin hips. He chewed on the corner of his drooping gray mustache and adjusted the strap of his battered hat that covered his thin hair and balding head as he watched them intently. It was his job to watch people and be aware of strangers, especially these days with all of the trouble that had been going on in the area. A sheriff's star on his vest reflected rays of the rising sun. Sheriff Mort Dooley decided he should keep an eye on this pair of newcomers. He stepped away from the shade and followed the couple at a distance. The lady did not look suspicious, but the man with the fancy 2 guns worried him. The casual way he walked with confidence was the trait of a gunman. He followed them to Main Street, leaned against the wall of the Mercantile, and continued his vigil. The man and woman stopped in front of the Spring City Hotel. They exchanged a few words, and the man handed the lady her traveling bag. He tipped his hat to her and stepped back, allowing her room to climb the 2 steps to the hotel entrance and disappear inside. The man turned and continued walking down the street, leading the big horse. Farther down the street was the livery, and it looked like the man was angling in that direction. A logical move for a newcomer with a horse to be taken care of. Jack could hear the tinny strains of a honky-tonk piano drifting out of the Red Bull Saloon down the street. It seemed too early in the day, but the place was obviously open and doing business. Cowhands and miners were passing in and out of the swinging batwing doors. The music grew louder as Jack approached. He was almost parallel with the establishment when 2 boisterous young men slammed through the batwings onto the saloon porch. They were both tipsy and laughing at anything and everything in general. These men were trouble ready to happen, and Clayton knew it could very well mean trouble for him. He knew these men, Billy Tate and his younger brother Jeb. Quickly, Clayton lowered his head, letting the brim of his Stetson shade his face, and continued walking nonchalantly on past the saloon. Just the luck, he thought. A few minutes in town and he could be recognized. The Tom Reagan impersonation would be finished before it could begin. Clayton had met up with the Tate boys before, and because of him, the boys had spent 2 years in Leavenworth Federal Prison. They would have a score to settle with Jack. He felt the hackles on the back of his neck bristle as he strode by the pair. Hopefully, they were too drunk to notice him. When he heard their laughter stop, it worried him more. Had they seen him? He dared not turn and look back, dared not quicken his step. Had he looked back, he would have seen the 2 ruffians halt before stepping to the ground where their horses were hitched. Billy Tate had stopped laughing and stared at the back of the man walking in the street. Jeb also stopped laughing as he saw his brother become distracted. "What's the matter, Billy?" Jeb asked. "I don't know," Billy mumbled. "I just thought for a moment that... But it couldn't be. That man looks like that G-Man Clayton. Didn't see his face, though." "No," said Jeb. "Clayton's got that mean big black of his. Besides, I heard he'd been killed down in Arizona." "You're probably right. That ain't him." They stepped to their mounts, climbed aboard, wheeled, and rode at a gallop down the street and past Clayton, kicking dust into his face. Jack breathed a sigh of relief as he saw them pass him and ride on. He raised his head as he watched them go. But his relief was short-lived, for the Tate brothers suddenly reined up hard, their horses' hind legs sliding between their front legs, almost losing footing altogether, but managing to stay upright as the boys twisted them savagely around and drumming their rib cages to send them charging furiously back the way they had just come. The Tates had their guns out now and aimed directly at Clayton. Instantly, Jack knew they must have recognized him as they passed by. Quickly, pulling the big red stallion around and sending him back down the street away from the oncoming riders, Clayton dived to the side of the street and lead from the blazing pistols raked the dirt inches behind his moving frame. He rolled up against the wooden sidewalk on his back, half sitting up. He had both 6 guns out as he came to a halt, and they both were belching flame and thunder. The Tates roared closer, firing steadily as they came, but from charging horses, their aims were not good. Bullets spattered against the wooden sidewalk and into the walls of the millinery behind where Clayton lay returning fire. Billy Tate swayed in the saddle, and his mount pulled up short as he took one of Clayton's lead pills in his left shoulder. Then new firing came from back down the street. Jeb's hat flew off as a speeding projectile whistled close to his shaggy blonde head. He pulled his mount up, looking down the street. While both men were preoccupied with this new attack, Clayton leveled both guns and poured lead into the Tates. With screams of pain and snorts of thrashing horses, the 2 men fell from their saddles and sprawled in the dust as their terrified horses wheeled and bolted riderless down the street. Dust was hanging in the air as Clayton pushed himself to his feet and strode toward the 2 prone bodies, both pistols aimed directly at their heads as he cautiously approached. Jeb was lying on his back, both arms outstretched, a mass of blood covering his chest. Blood dripped from between his teeth, and his sightless eyes stared blankly into the sun. Billy was lying on his stomach, gun still clutched in his hand. Jack holstered his left handgun, reached down and retrieved Billy's. Then, with the toe of his shiny black stovepipe boot, he hooked it under Billy's ribs and kicked him over. He was just as dead as his brother Jeb. Clayton was still staring at the bodies as he absently holstered his pistol and dropped Billy's beside him. It was always a grim moment when he had to deal with gunmen like this. Even though they had asked for it, Jack always wished it could have been some other way. Still in thought, Jack barely heard the footsteps behind him before he heard the raspy voice. "Just hold it there, young feller," Sheriff Mort Dooley commanded. Jack turned slightly toward him as he came into view, his 6 gun out and aimed at Clayton's chest. Townspeople were once again venturing out into the street, gawking. It had all happened so fast, and now it was over, just as fast as it had begun. "I saw it from the beginning," the sheriff added. "I know they started it, and I helped you out, but I've got a lot of questions to ask you. So I'll just trouble you for that fancy gun belt and shooting irons of yours until I get this straightened out." Then he added gloomily, "I wouldn't want to be in your shoes when Josh Tate finds out what you did to his 2 boys. Him and his other 2 boys will want your hide for sure." Jack grimaced, just what he needed, more trouble to interfere with what he was here for. With reluctance, he unbuckled the belt and handed the rig over. "The jail's over there," he motioned with his scruffy, pointed chin. "Keep your hands up and get moving." "My horse ran loose down the street," Jack started. "Don't worry none about him," Dooley said. "I had someone catch him up. He'll be in the livery, and your traveling bag will be brought along to my office. Now do as I say and get moving." Jack looked into the steely eyes of the wizened old man and could see that he meant business, but he could also see the man was afraid and trying to control a shaking hand. Jack half smiled. All right. He turned and headed for the jail. Chapter 7. The mission begins. "So you are Tom Reagan," Mort Dooley repeated, after Jack gave the name and explained that the Tates must have mistaken him for someone else, or if he had had a run-in with them before, he did not remember it. "Ain't you that government fellow the colonel sent for?" Jack was caught off guard with surprise. He was not aware that Tom Reagan's expected presence in Spring City had been communicated to anyone other than Colonel Montrose. "Did the colonel tell you that?" Clayton asked. "Yes, he did," the sheriff said matter-of-factly. "I suggested that we needed to bring in some outside help. I haven't been able to get a lead on these rascals that have been attacking the mines and the freight wagons. And now, with this dark rider in the fray, well, I'm afraid I've been split 3 ways from Sunday. The colonel said he would try to get government help. He knows people in high places. When he found out they were sending you, he told me to be on the lookout and bring you right out to his place. Well, Jack said, I had hoped to work under cover, but, oh, you don't have to worry there none, son. I won't tell anybody anything. Jack grinned at the man's sincerity. I'm sure you won't. Then he changed his tone. What about this dark rider you spoke of? Well, whoever this gang is, that's causing all the trouble, well, they got competition from the dark rider fella. Funny thing, though. At first, I kind of laughed about him, 'cause he was getting in the way of these other fellas, preventing them from their stealing. He didn't seem to hurt anyone else. But lately, this dark rider's got his own gang and has been hitting our banks, freight, and stage lines. Just as bad as the others. Not much else I can tell you. We'll go see the colonel, and he'll fill you in on anything else he can help with. Is he here in town? Clayton asked. No, he's got a nice place about 5 miles north of town and close to his mining operations. Lives alone there with his wife, now that the kids are gone. His daughter married and moved east. His son was killed a month ago when raiders hit their freight wagons on the way to Carson City. The colonel himself was wounded in the leg. I kind of feel like it was my fault. It was my job to keep law and order. I guess I'm just getting too old. Sounds to me like these raiders are too big a problem for anyone. I can't guarantee that I can do any better. The old man looked into Clayton's clear blue eyes, a little mist in his own. Thank you, son. It was right nice of you to say that, but I know I'm not the man I used to be. Jack didn't know what to say. He was silent, then said, We'd better get going. The day's more than half over already. Besides, he was thinking that he'd be better off outside of town when Josh Tate found out about his boys. It was about 2 o'clock when Jack Clayton and Sheriff Mort Dooley reined up to the hitch rack in front of Colonel Montrose's big 2-story white frame house in Antelope Valley. The sun had been high in the sky for several hours by now, and the heat had become somewhat oppressive. Both riders were sweaty, as were their mounts, even though they had been ridden leisurely to keep them fresh as possible. Jack had left his suit coat behind at the sheriff's office and had unbuttoned his vest and loosened his black string tie before setting out on the trek. Mrs. Montrose answered the knock and opened the door. She was small in stature, and her gray hair was thinning. Oh, hello, Mort, she said, her voice a little warbly and cracked. This is Mr. Reagan, Ethel, the sheriff said. Is the colonel in? Pleased to meet you, Mr. Reagan. A slight curtsy. The colonel's in his study. Please come in. They followed her to the back of the house, and she ushered them through a pair of double doors that opened into a large room and left them. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and sunlight streamed in through a large window behind an ornate wooden desk. The man behind the desk was thin and had a neatly trimmed white beard that matched a full head of unruly white hair. When he pushed himself to his feet, leaning on a shiny black cane, his full height of over 6 feet could be seen. Mort, he greeted cordially. Good to see you. Colonel, Mort got right to it, rushing forward. This is Tom Reagan, the government man you sent for. The colonel beamed, limping around his desk to extend his hand. Well, I'm sure glad to see you, he said, appraising Clayton with his sharp dark eyes. I hope I can be of help, Jack said, taking his hand. Sit down, the colonel offered, pointing to a chair in front of his desk as he retreated to his own chair. Mort slid another chair over from the corner. The sheriff has been telling me about the trouble you've been having with the raiders and the Dark Rider. Jack opened the tirade. It's completely out of hand, the colonel said. No fault of Mort's, he added. We're up against a highly organized army of bandits. Mines have been sabotaged, shipments have been hijacked, payrolls have been held up, men have been killed, my own son included. You have no clue as to the identity of any of these raiders? Jack asked. No, he sighed. They always elude us. They seldom leave any witnesses alive. Have all of the mine owners been hit? Every last one of us, the colonel said. Those of us who ship ore to Carson City for smelting and refining have had our shipments hijacked. It's almost impossible to get our shipments through. There are 2 mines in the area that do their own refining and have helped the rest of us with what available capacity they had, but their mines have been raided and the bullion taken. We have mined a great deal of silver in the last few months, but except for what is unmined, most of it is now gone. So, we banded together to form a protective association. There are 6 of us all together, including my operation, the Silver Saber, John Wheeler's Lucky Strike, Dan Sturgis' Silver Boot, Bill Porter's Big Dig. Jim Petrie's Silver Lode has a refinery as well as Ed Gordon's Glory Hill. Unfortunately, Ed was killed just last week. If we didn't know better, we'd think the raiders had killed him. But it was an accident. He fell into his stamping machine. An awful way to go. The colonel shook his head in despair. How do you know it was an accident? Jack asked. Ben Colby saw it. He tried to reach him in time, but it was too late. And who is Ben Colby? He's business manager for Ed Gordon's partner from back east somewheres. Ed ran into financial difficulty about a year ago, and he needed financing. He sold half interest, but the partner never took an active role in the management until a few months ago when Ben Colby was sent to manage the partner's share. Now Colby manages the whole operation. Just what kind of person is this Ben Colby? Jack asked. Nice fellow, the colonel said enthusiastically. If you're thinking he's connected with anything, I'm afraid you are barking up the wrong tree. What's happening to Ed Gordon's share? Ed's been alone since his wife died last year. His only relative is a niece in Chicago. Colby plans on sending her share of any profits to her. With all the trouble we've had, there has been little profit. I see, Jack mused. Then, as an added thought, are any of these other miners aware that you sent for help? Why, yes, of course. We all agreed to ask the government for help. That's why you were here. Chapter 8. The Dark Rider Strikes. It was late afternoon when Jack and Mort Dooley headed back to town. The sun had lowered somewhat in the pale blue sky, and the heat of the day was starting to dissipate. It had been decided that the colonel would contact the other miners in the association, and they would all meet at 7 o'clock that night in Spring City at the office of lawyer Arnold Daggett, who the colonel had also confided in. Clayton had found the colonel to be a very fine and honest gentleman. Perhaps too much of a gentleman and too honest to handle the business at hand. He had made everyone aware that Tom Reagan was a government agent, so undercover work would be entirely out of the question. But then again, undercover was the work of Jack Clayton. What was the work of Tom Reagan? Obviously, Reagan would not have come here to solve the problem. He was, in fact, to be part of the problem. Clayton and the sheriff was just starting to top a rise when the stillness of the air was broken. Their mounts jerked to a halt with a startle. Gunfire in rapid succession howled over the ridge. The 2 men glanced at each other urgently, then sent their horses forward to the top of the rise and pulled up. In the valley below, they could see the winding dirt road that lead into town. To their left, around a bend, they could see the afternoon stage barreling through, the driver whipping furiously at his 4-up team. The shotgun guard was turned facing rearward, his shotgun leveled and firing at the band of riders coming in hot pursuit, guns blazing. Clayton counted 6 bandits, including the leader who was clad in black from head to toe. Mort exclaimed, "It's that dad-burned Dark Rider and his gang." For a moment, they took in the scene. Then, as they saw the shotgun rider throw up his weapon and fly backward off the box, Clayton knew they had to take a hand. "Let's go," he shouted, as he kicked the big red stallion into a gallop and took off down the slope without waiting for Sheriff Mort Dooley. Clayton, six-shooter in hand, rode straight toward the oncoming stage and outlaws, firing in rapid succession. He rode past the Concorde just as the driver dropped the reins, grasped his bleeding chest, and fell from the boot, landing almost in front of Clayton. Jack pulled the big red to a sliding halt, dust billowing around him, and kept on firing. Click! The weapon was empty. In one lightning movement, Clayton sheathed the Colt and drew his left handgun. The outlaws had pulled up now, turning their attention to the intruder, slinging lead. Clayton fired again and again. One outlaw fell from the saddle, and he saw one of the other outlaws sag in his saddle, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Mort Dooley came charging up behind Clayton, firing haphazardly, unable to control his shaking hand, but the additional firepower was enough to give the outlaws enough food for thought and convince them to give up the attack. They wheeled their mounts. The man who had fallen had managed to get to his feet, and two riders on each side of him scooped him up as they rode off in bitter retreat. Clayton threw a couple of shots after the fleeing bandits until this shooter also clicked empty. Then, as if without thought, he holstered the weapon as he wheeled the big red around to race after the driverless runaway coach. Mort started after the outlaws, but quickly decided it was not a safe thing to do, so he reined up, wheeled, and rode off after the man on the big red stallion. The Concorde swayed and rocked dangerously back and forth, wheels coming off the ground at times as the lumbering carriage slewed violently around curves in the road. The frightened horses raced on, traces dragging on the ground beneath their pounding hooves. Clayton urged the big red on, asking for more speed and getting it. This horse was every bit as fast and strong as Regret. And he had as much heart. On and on they raced, steadily and surely cutting down the distance. And now they were close enough that the dust from the rampaging wheels was thick as fog around them. Jack urged the big horse off to the left, riding alongside the coach now. He could see the teams up ahead and the dragging reins. Faster, faster! He pushed the gallant steed onward. Now he was even with the box. Faster, faster! Now he was parallel to the rear team. Onward, onward! Now he was close behind the lead team. Then, closer, closer. Then, reaching out with his right, he grasped the left lead horse's bridle and pulled, simultaneously pulling the big stallion to a sliding skid, dragging the frightened teams to a gradual halt. The horses stomped in place and blew, their ribs heaving beneath their lathered coats. Red Devil snorted relief as Jack leaped from the saddle, darted for the stage, and threw the door open, dust still hanging at the air and raining down on him. He tried to mask his surprise as he saw the four passengers. There were three men in business suits, huddled in their seats, quivering with fear. In the right rear seat of the coach sat a composed young lady with red hair. As surprised as she was also, she showed no surprise at the sight of Jack Clayton. Knowing that this young lady could blow his cover by revealing his true name, Clayton quickly said, "I'm Tom Reagan. Are you all right?" His gaze fixed on the lady whom he knew to be Tamara Wilde, Pinkerton detective. While the other passengers mumbled something that Jack didn't even bother to listen to, Tamara Wilde answered, "Yes, fine. I'm Sue Gordon." Chapter 9. Dangerous Encounter. Dusk was starting to set in, and the air was rapidly beginning to chill. Townspeople ran from all parts of the street, gathering around the stage and crowded close, as it clamored to a stop in front of the Nevada Stage and Freight Line office. The crowd babbled with murmuring sounds as their questions blended into a droning cacophony of unauditable discourse. "Whoa, whoa," Clayton called to the teams as he leaned back on the driver's box, pulling the reins tight and back as far as he could to bring the four up to a halt. "You'll hear all about it soon enough," Mort protested, waving the onlookers back away from the stage as he climbed down from the box where he had been sitting in the shotgun rider's seat. "Somebody, give us hand with these bodies." He waved toward the roof of the coach where the forms of the fallen guard and driver lay. Some men moved forward and were climbing up to the box as Clayton climbed down from his side after tying off the reins to hold the team. He strode to the boot and untied Mort's and his horses, led them to a hitch rack, retied them, and walked back to the stage. Mort was on the sidewalk conversing with a middle-aged man who Clayton assumed to be the owner of the stage line. The body of the guard had been lifted down and was being carried away while the driver's body was now in the process of being handed down. The crowd was still milling about, but had dispersed somewhat to allow room for the removal of bodies. Jack returned to the boot and untied the canvas flap, flipped it open, and began to retrieve the luggage. The three men in business suits picked up their baggage and scurried quickly away. When the last body had been removed, Tamara Wilde descended from the coach. Jack already had her bag ready to hand to her. She reached for it and smiled coyly. "Why, thank you, Mr. Reagan." Her green eyes bore into his. Jack tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Gordon." He grinned wryly as she turned and walked away to the sidewalk. He heard her ask Mort Dooley for directions to the office of a certain lawyer named Arnold Daggett, and Mort pointed down and across the street. Jack's steely eyes followed the direction and sighted in on the shingle of Daggett's office. Then he heard Mort say to her, "I'm on my way there now, Miss Gordon. Come with me." He took her arm, and they strolled on down the street into the gathering shadows. Jack was still watching them go, wondering what Tamara was doing here posing as Ed Gordon's niece. Perhaps they would wind up working together again on this case, but chances were that things were just going to get more complicated, as they usually did when Tamara was around. A passel of horses and riders thundered into the street from the other end of town, interrupting Jack's thoughts. The power of the charging horses, stirring the air and churning dust up into Jack's face, forced Clayton to jump backwards toward the sidewalk as if trying to avoid being ridden down by the careless riders. He watched them pass by. 4 of them. The lead rider was lean and swarthy and rode a rangy-looking gruel. They reined up in front of the Red Bull, dismounted and stomped inside. They looked like trouble. Could this be Josh Tate and his boys? No, he told himself. They all seemed to be about the same age. Clayton checked his watch. 6 o'clock. Another hour before the miners' meeting at 7. He needed to see Francie right away. He hated to frequent saloons, but this meant he would have to visit the Red Bull. He stepped into the shadow of the alley between the stage depot and the adjoining hardware store. Here, out of sight of any watching eyes, he took a small pad of paper and a stub of a pencil from his vest pocket and scribbled a quick note, folded it the size of a banknote, and placed it in his wallet with the other bills. Then, stuffing the remaining pad and pencil stub back into his pocket, he stepped out onto the boardwalk and sauntered casually down the street and through the swinging bat-wing doors of the saloon. The same tinny piano he had heard earlier today was still sounding out the same trilling tune. An oversized wagon wheel-shaped fixture overhead held 10 lighted lanterns and did a good job of lighting the barroom floor. Several other lanterns were spaced along the walls, and the overall light was fairly bright for an indoor establishment. The place was already beginning to get crowded. Most of the tables were already filled with boisterous men drinking and more sullen men playing the gaming tables. The table that interested him most was halfway across the room, directly in front of him. 3 people were intensely concentrating on a poker game that looked as if it had been in progress for quite a while. Judging by the small stack of chips in front of each of the 2 men, and the stacks of chips piled up in front of the striking blonde-haired lady dealer in the elegant blue evening gown. Francie Jones had used the cover of a lady gambler before, and she was good at it. The hard cases he had seen ride into town were hovering over the polished bar that ran along the far side wall. They were sloshing whiskey from bottles to shot glasses and spilling the liquid haphazardly onto the bar. A short, stocky, nervous-looking bartender with a black drooping mustache and shiny bald head worked feverishly at sopping up the mess with a thick towel. No complaints were uttered by him. Clayton slowly started to cross the floor, feeling eyes on him and not daring to glance toward the bar where the four men had interrupted their binge to watch him closely. Jack drew abreast of the poker table, standing next to the fourth and empty chair to the left of Francie. "Mind if I sit in?" he asked, tipping his hat brim up and pushing the hat to the back of his head. "Game's open," Francie said brusquely, raking in the current pot and not bothering to look up. She scooped up the deck and expertly shuffled, riffled, and cut while Clayton settled into the chair. He pulled out a wad of bills from his wallet and tossed them on the table in front of him. Francie's slender, white, nimble fingers slid the bills in front of her, flipped through them with a lightning count, and slid the appropriate amount of chips in front of him. Clayton smiled slightly. She was amazing. Jack stayed in the game about half an hour. He would have to quit soon and get ready for the miners' meeting. Besides, Francie had managed to retrieve most of his chips by now, and what was remaining sat in the center of the table with the current pot. The hand was played out, and Francie pulled the pot in and heaped these additional chips onto her pile. She smiled, more than a hint of triumph at Jack. He grimaced, then slid his chair back and stood up. "Well, I guess that about does it for me. So if you all will excuse me, gentleman and lady." He straightened his hat. "Better luck next time, cowboy," Francie chided, not bothering to look up at him. "Yeah, sure," Clayton's Adam's apple bobbed. "Next time." He turned and headed for the door. Out of the corner of his eye, he checked to see that the four hard cases were still watching him. He could see movement as they started to turn from the bar. He kept striding forward, casually, trying not to let on he knew they were following him. It was completely dark now as he stepped out into the cool night air. Street fires had been lit at regular intervals along the street, bringing a flickering golden glow to the evening and casting dark shadows. The street was empty, save for the horses tied to hitch rails, as the townspeople had already retreated indoors for the night. The men were moving faster behind him now, not so careful to be noticed as they were inside. Jack had just stepped off the boardwalk into the street when they rushed him, attacking from behind, all four tackling him and grinding his face and chest into the dusty street. Jack tried to react and roll, but there were too many of them. Fists pounded into his face and midsection. Everything went blurry on him, and he felt sick. The rangy one, that appeared to be the leader, reached under Jack's collar and pulled. "Him to his feet. Stand back," he ordered his men, cocking his arm, ready to drive his fist into Clayton's drooping face while he held him up on rubbery, sagging legs. The other three men stepped back out of the way, standing in a semicircle around him. "Hey, what's going on here?" A commanding voice boomed over the drum of horses' hooves as 6 riders pulled their horses to a halt in the middle of the street behind the assailants. "Let that man go," shouted Colonel Montrose, sliding from the shiny black leather military saddle of his tall gray horse. He punched his cane into the dirt and hopped forward to Clayton's side and grasping his shoulders as he was released and slumped into the colonel's arms. The other riders had dismounted, and a tall, heavy-set man in a tweed suit rushed up and spun the lead assailant around. "What's the meaning of this, Rio?" he barked. "Don't you know who this is? It's Tom Reagan. He's been sent here to help us." "Well, boss," he stammered, "I didn't know." "You didn't know, you dumb ox." He landed a roundhouse punch on Rio Pierce's scruffy jaw and sent him sprawling onto his back in the middle of the street. Rio slowly sat up in the dirt, glaring angrily at his boss and rubbing his jaw. Jack was getting his feet stabilized beneath him now, and his brain was beginning to clear. "Thanks, Colonel," Clayton gasped, rubbing his throat and beginning to catch his breath. Sorry about my men, Mr. Clayton, the big man apologized as he came forward to help steady the beaten man. Jack looked up into the man's broad face and glinting eyes. I'm Ben Colby, the big man said, as if answering Clayton's unasked question. I assure you, I will deal with them for this. They get mean when they drink. Then added, Are you all right? Jack was quickly pulling himself together. He shrugged Colby and the colonel aside and stepped back to stand on his own steam. Yeah, his voice rasped with bitterness and anger. He glared at Rio sitting in the dirt. But I won't forget this. The lawyer Arnold Daggett was a short, skinny, actually puny, little middle-aged man with thinning black strands of hair slicked back from a high forehead and receding hairline. His pince-nez glasses, hanging low on his hooked nose, only emphasized his bird-like, that is, vulture-like face. His voice was high-pitched and squeaky, even though he tried to talk with an oily ease as he lounged back carelessly in his black leather chair behind his cluttered walnut desk. Jack Clayton was a lawyer himself and took an instant dislike to him, for this man was the typical stereotype of a shyster lawyer. The meeting with the mine owners had been in progress now for about a half hour, and the situation with the raiders and the Dark Rider had been discussed in depth, though no solutions nor plan of action had been offered. The general consensus was that they were glad that Tom Reagan was there to help them, and they had complete confidence in his abilities. Jack was feeling better now, having somewhat recovered from the beating he had suffered from Rio Pierce and the other Colby men. When Jack and miners arrived for the meeting, Sue Gordon was still in conference with Daggett, as she had been substantiating her claim to her uncle's share of the Glory Hill mine and discussing her concerns about the mine's troubles. Daggett had asked Sheriff Mort Dooley to stay and explain things from his perspective. The mine owners had been introduced to the red-haired girl, and the colonel suggested that she stay for the meeting. After all, she was a mine owner too. The miners then took seats in wooden chairs cloistered about the unimpressive law office. Ben Colby oozed charm from the moment he met Sue Gordon. I'm so sorry about what happened to your uncle, Miss Gordon. Although I didn't work with him very long, I grew to be quite fond of the old gentleman. His words flowed fluidly and smooth in an elegant, soothing voice. He seemed very honest and genuine. We all miss him, very much. I'm sure you do, she replied, sadness in her voice and glancing sideways out of the corner of her eye to Jack. She didn't believe a word of it. She smiled demurely at Colby. He beamed with self-satisfaction. As the meeting was breaking up, Colonel Montrose asked, Are you staying here in town tonight, Miss Gordon? I suppose so, she answered. I really haven't taken time to get a room, though. If I can find a way to my uncle's house, I suppose I could go there. Well, I've been staying at your uncle's since I came here, Ben Colby said, and I'm still staying there. I can take you out there, and I'll find someplace else to stay while you are here. Since I'm a bachelor, it might not look proper for you and me to be out there alone together, although I assure you, I am a gentleman. I'm sure you are, Mr. Colby, she replied sweetly, but I don't think I'm ready to see the house yet. Especially not tonight. I think it best I stay in town for a while. My wife and I would be pleased if you consented to stay with us, Miss Gordon, Colonel Montrose offered. That's awfully nice of you, sir, but really, I couldn't. The tone left room for acceptance. Nonsense. I won't hear of it. You're staying with us. It will be good to have a young person in the house again. My wife and I have been so lonely since... His voice trailed off, sorrow in his eyes. Well, all right, she stammered, if you insist. She smiled broadly. Jack caught the sense of a coup well pulled off. That settles it then, the colonel said triumphantly. I'll rent a rig at the livery and we'll drive out right away. I don't suppose you've even had supper? Tamara nodded. As a matter of fact, I haven't, she admitted. Well, Ethel, we'll take care of that. He beamed, taking her arm, and escorting her out of the office. Jack was still standing, his hat in hand, and watching them go. The room had mostly cleared out by now. Mort and most of the other miners had already left. Only Clayton, Colby, and Daggett remained. Jack started for the door, settling his black Stetson into place over his dark wavy hair. "Just a minute," Colby called. Jack turned, his hand still on the doorknob of the partially open door. "I think we need to talk," he said brusquely, a tinge of command in his voice. Jack pulled his dark brows close together, pondered a moment, then pushed the door shut and sauntered across the room to face Colby head-on. Colby stood a few inches taller than Jack. Clayton said nothing, waited. "Just what happened between you and Rio Pierce?" he demanded. "I didn't even know who he was when he jumped me. You'd better ask him," Jack answered grimly. Colby cocked his head back, thought a moment, and grimaced. "Arnie," he nodded his large head toward the lawyer, "get Rio in here. We need to get this straightened out." "Sure thing, Mr. Colby," the runt answered, jumping to his feet, grabbing his derby hat, and nervously scurrying out the door. "How much did the boss tell you?" Colby demanded. "Boss?" Jack thought. "Here it comes. Time to play along. Tom Reagan knows this boss. Play along." "Not much," Jack admitted. "You know, I've been working the other end of the pipeline along the border." He was taking a chance that he was saying the right things to the right person. "Yeah, he tells me you are good at what you do." "Just what does Tom Reagan do so well?" Jack said. "I try. I'll believe it when I see it." Colby all but growled. "And I don't want any more trouble with my men. You got that?" "That's up to them," Clayton shot back coldly. "No," he said icily. "That is up to me." He spun around and paced away from Jack, stopped short, and turned back to face him again, rubbing the back of his thick neck. "And now we've got this problem of the Gordon girl showing up. We've got to do something about it." "Meaning?" Jack thought without saying. He waited. Colby stared him down, refusing to say it also. Jack nodded. "When do you want it done?" He remarked matter-of-factly. "Might as well get it over with as soon as possible." He half grinned and chuckled slyly. "The Raiders just may not like the Colonel organizing against them, and they just might attack him on the way home in the dark tonight. It would be a shame if that innocent young girl happened to get killed with him." Jack hooked his thumbs in his gun belt and smiled with feigned admiration at Colby's cunning, nodding his approval. "And I'll get to see just how good you really are," Colby added. Just then the door opened, and Daggett clambered inside with Rio Pierce on his heels. "Pierce, shut that door and get over here," Colby blustered. Rio shuffled forward. "I want to know why you jumped Reagan, and it better be good." "Well, like I said, boss, I didn't know who he was. Besides, he busted up the stage holdup this afternoon. He's the reason we didn't get the girl, and Al and Shorty are both nursing gunshot wounds from this hombre's lead." He looked accusing at Clayton. Colby's eyes grew grim, and he glared at Jack. "Is that true?" Jack shrugged. "I guess it is," he admitted calmly. "But how was I to know what was going on? I was with the sheriff, and we saw the Dark Rider leading the outfit. I had to go with Dooley's lead." He lied a little, then added with surprise, "So, you are the Dark Rider?" He grinned at Rio. "No, he's not the Dark Rider," Colby fumed with agitation. "That hellion has caused us so much trouble, we decided to start pinning our jobs on him. Seems to have worked, though, because he's been lying low for the last week. Things must be getting too hot for him." Clayton feigned more admiration. "Very clever, Mr. Colby," he said. "I heard you were a very clever man. Now I see it's true." Colby's manner seemed to lighten up. He loved the adulation. "Well, what's done is done, I guess. I don't suppose it could have been helped." Then to Rio, "I don't want any more trouble between you two. Got that?" "Yeah, boss," Pierce answered reluctantly. "But what about Al and Shorty? They need a doc. Maybe the Raiders hit us tonight and the boys got wounded. They can come into town in the morning to get patched up. Colby smiled to himself with self-satisfaction. But right now, he changed the topic. You two have to work together, starting tonight. The two of you are following the colonel. Neither he nor the girl will ever be seen alive again. You got that? This time, Rio smiled broadly with anticipation. Yes, sir, boss. Cold-blooded killer, Clayton thought without changing expression. Chapter 10. Ambush at Briar Pass. Clayton and Rio sat atop their horses in the shadows of an alley.